The Plein Air Easton Podcast is brought to you by the Avalon Foundation, enriching the lives of those on the eastern shore of Maryland through the arts. Visit avalonfoundation.org for details on events, performances, and educational programming offered throughout the year. This episode is sponsored by Paint Out West, a virtual painting workshop conducted by Chris Kolupski. Paint along with Chris throughout October from the comfort of your own home. Visit chriskolupski.com to sign up. That's ChrisKolupski.com.
And we'll take a break halfway through, like not a real break, but he'll be like, now we're going to hear from our sponsors. And then we'll like...
No, that's not how I say it, but anyway.
That's how he says it. And now, a word from our sponsors. Like, kind of like that.
I may use that today.
That's what he's going to do today. He's going to try something new with you here on the...
Excellent.
The podcast.
This week we talked through Skype with Stephen Haynes.
Yeah, it was just a really... This was a conversation that to me was different than any of the other ones that we have had, you know, where he is exploring and taking art. It was just, it's a very cool, he's thinking in some really interesting ways. This is our first like sci-fi broadcast, I feel like.
Yeah. We talked about AI a little bit, yes. A beautiful, wonderful moment with his grandmother that he mentioned, when he first learned to draw, and just, some really interesting, intense sort of observations and stuff that he's into that I think we're going to find throughout the whole process, just really interesting stuff, the way they think, and I think very useful, even beyond painting. No,
I think that you're going to like this podcast, so give it a good listen, and make sure you stick around for the second half where you hear him really talk about AI and its role in art and what does it mean to exist. It'll keep you thinking for a while. It's going to keep me thinking for a while. Hey, Tim, do you want to rule the world? Everybody does.
Yep, that comes up too. Well, enjoy. All right, welcome everyone. You are listening to the Plein Air Easton Podcast.
Aren't you lucky?
I'm Tim Wigan, along with Jessica Bellis, and today our artist and plein air veteran is Stephen Haynes. Stephen, welcome to the show. Thank you for dropping in and taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me.
Stephen, we always kind of want to start by, maybe it is my fascination with, education and my lack of artistic aptitude. But, tell me about when you were a kid and how often you found yourself drawing, painting, sketching. Was this something that you can really see yourself? Can you picture yourself as a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, being into art? Or is it something that came about later?
Yeah, so I actually, from an early age, I was encouraged to make art. My grandmother, on my mom's side, was an artist. I put together later that my grandfather had a really high-paying job, so she could afford to be an artist and without consequence. But at the time, as a youngster, you don't think about those things. You just think, my grandmother's an artist, that's a possibility,
That's cool,
yeah.
Right.
And so that was always kind of the guiding light. As often happens, life gets in the way and you have to be, responsible or make other decisions. So I wasn't able to follow through with that,
But did you take art classes? Did you, or when you had the option, were you taking art in high school or not really? It was just something that was on the periphery.
No, for sure. I was sort of surrounded by creative people. My mom and stepdad were interior designers, and my stepfather was built these crazy chairs with he'd stick two halves of the surfboard together to make a chair.
Industrial design. Right.
Crazy, and always thinking and tinkering and whatever. So it helped me think in those terms of just
you came from a creative household, not one that was full of like business and bureaucracy. It was like a thriving creative space.
For sure. Yeah, that's like a blessing and a curse, right? Because while you think, oh, I could just be creative and do these things, you know, when it does come time to pay the bills, you know, like when you have children, it's not, unless there's already something in place that's making you money. I mean, that's sadly what it boils down to. You just have to go get a job at some point. So yeah, I mean, that's what ended up happening. But yes, the focus for me has always been to eventually be an artist, just dead stop.
And did you go to college? Did you like get, or you know, I know that you're talking about having to have like a quote real job sometimes.
Yeah.
But like, tell me about sort of how your academic world flowed.
Yeah. So I had a strange upbringing. First of all, I grew up in Southern California with my mom and stepdad, and then my dad lived in West Virginia. I was actually born in West Virginia, but whatever. So I would spend the summers in West Virginia and the rest of the school year in Southern California being like surfer, punk rock, skate, you know, all those things. And at some point, I had to leave a bad situation and I wanted to go to school. And part of me thought, I need to make this something that I can like turn into a career. And I was always doing one of my first like paying gigs. I'm doing air quotes for those of the paying gigs was I used to make concert posters when I was like 13 and 14 for a local concert, punk rock concert promoter. And then he would let me into the show for free if I made the flyers and then distributed them for him to promote the concert.
Sounds like a good deal,
yeah, I was
right?
Like, sweet, you know, because I got to see all these bands that I wanted to see.
What was the club?
It was called Numbskull Productions out of Oxnard, California.
Okay.
But so I reflected on that as an later teenage years and thought, well, what is this thing where you take typography and visuals, you know, and I didn't know what like graphic design was. Anyway, ended up going to school for graphic design at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, which I had a couple of family members go there when it was an established actual trade school. And so in my mind, that's what I had. That's what I thought it was going to be. And it by the time I got there, it had already turned into like a for-profit, like just monolith. I got some good things out of it, but if I had to do over again, I'd probably go somewhere else.
Got it.
But I graduated about 2 weeks after 9/11. So like all the whole industry just fell out, and there was like, you know, and I was back to like working in bike shops and just trying to scrape together something. And then my wife and I got pregnant, and then just further down the road. And then it wasn't for 5 or 6 years until I got my first like real design and illustration job for a t-shirt company. So I was doing like illustrations and design primarily for screen print.
Uh-huh.
And then I got into, I started.
Were you picking up paintbrushes during this time or no?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
your focus. I mean, trust me, I've had small children, so I understand that there's not a lot of, you know, between work and trying to sleep and trying to eat and trying to make sure your kids thrive. Like, there's not a whole lot of space. Sure. But did you find yourself picking up paintbrushes during that period of time?
And just for the record, we were talking about another artist, because we've had a couple people who've gone from the design world into the painting. Is that kind of what the general basis is?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that there are a lot of people who, I mean, I think that there's people who are fine artists or painters for some reason that I don't understand, because I'm not one of those. I feel like they're like, oh, I was an illustrator for a while, or oh, I made ads for a while, as if it's like some
yeah, like
terrible thing.
Well,
when in my mind, I'm like, oh, that part's pretty cool too. I'm like, maybe it's because I'm in the concert industry, but I'm like, I love concert posters. Tell me more.
For sure. And I still love those too. So there's two questions there. One, was I continuing to make paintings or draw or whatever while I was also working for this screen printing place,
bike shop or whatever?
And the answer is yes. Like I was always drawing, painting. It wasn't a daily practice, but it was. I mean, there were a few birthdays where my wife just gifted me the afternoon so that I could like make a mess in the kitchen, so I could like paint and do whatever, and it was, refreshing.
It's a nice gift.
For sure.
Yeah, it is.
But at some point when I was working at the screen print place, I actually started making gig posters again, but I was screen printing them now. And then I sort of hit upon a particular thing, and then I started doing paintings within that style. And so I was carrying on with that for a while, and then I got a different job with a magazine, with a small publisher that did 2 cycling magazines. And then that's when the things really opened up, and I got a lot more latitude in that job. It was very like this old hippie ran the place, and like it was very cool, and we worked long hours, but I got to spend a lot more time outside and a lot more time developing things that I wanted to develop, whether it be illustration work or screen printing, and then incorporate that into my work as an art director for the magazine. And that is when I came back around to this idea of plein air painting. It was like being outside more, seeing things. I was just reminded of a quote from Van Gogh, who was like, anyone that sees beauty in nature sees beauty all the time, or something to that effect. I'm bastardizing the quote, but I sort of had that epiphany of like, like the outdoors changes constantly, and I could just, react to that. And then sort of from there started making, toe in the water attempts at plein air painting. And then that's like, that starts the next segment, but I was with the magazine for 10 years. So
that's a long time.
Yeah.
What's your we haven't gotten into Plein Air Easton yet, but I want another quick question here. Stephen, what's your style when you were for 10 years at the magazine place? And do we see any of that in your plein air work that we've seen over obviously we can't show it, we're on a podcast, but have we seen it at the festivals?
Well, it's a progression, right? Like I've always done illustration, like through the concert posters, and then editorial illustration and whatnot. And then I've done like comic books and things like that. So it's like two halves of the same coin. There's like this illustrative comic booky side, and then I actually found this. I discovered this guy, James Gurney, through the internet and his books and whatnot. And he makes painting in plein air is so approachable that I thought, well, I can draw, and cool, I'll just do, and it was very like, he encourages you to just do like these little sketchbooks, like 6x8 sketchbooks, that I thought that's really inconspicuous, and I can be like super self-conscious outside and do this, but the goal at that point was to like try and be as representational as possible, meaning I wanted the thing to look like the thing, like I was still painting like objects, right? And then it's kind
of like establishing the fundamental, though. Like I think that's kind of where you want to start, right? Or that is like, that's a logical place for a lot of artists to start when they are like jumping into the plein air waters.
Yeah, right. And like until you, it's the what is it the known. The unknown unknowns, right? You don't know what you don't know. So you just start where you can, and then you figure it out as you go along. There's many quotes about this, like plein air is or painting. Successful painters have built in miles of canvas and whatnot. So it's figuring out what you're doing while you're doing it, but over a long period of time.
Right.
And you have to.
No, we've talked about this before. It's like, it is why the quick draw for people who don't give a lot of thought to plein air painting, they're like, wait a second, you did this in just an hour and I'm supposed to spend thousands of dollars on it or whatever. And it's like, oh, there's nothing about this painting that only took an hour.
Yeah, right.
Nothing about this painting that took an hour.
It's interesting. I spoke with an old friend and curator of mine, Bob Villamagna, and I was like, I don't know how to price my work, because I was at a crux in what I was doing, and there was people that were interested, and I didn't know how to price my work, and I wasn't represented at that time, and I had no lexicon for this new thing I was doing.
We get asked this question all the time.
And he was like, listen, you've been making artwork for 20 years. He's like, that's 20 years of experience you have. So therefore, don't treat it like I only spent 2 hours on this piece. treat it as I spent 2 hours and 20 years on this piece. Right. And that's that. And right. It sort of flipped the switch of like, right, okay, sure, now I get it,
Sure.
But I think that is such a switch between, like, I'm not going to say like the corporate world. No, I just use air quotes, just so you know, air quotes.
Yeah, popular today.
But like when we were talking about like, oh, the illustration, or advertising or whatever. But it's like when you are coming from a place where you're billing hourly and trying to move to a place where you want your artwork appreciated as fine art, like, it is not something that has to do with hourly billing anymore. Like, that is a real change moment, especially when your brain has been programmed to like keep track of your hours.
Oh, for sure. And a lot of places, I still do illustration work for magazines. They're like, we pay this much. Spend as long as you want on it, but like, this is all you're getting. So,
right.
So it actually pays to be really quick, and to have that system down. So
skill set, right.
But yeah, and it's sort of the antithesis of what any artist wants to think about, to be honest. Is like, how much do I charge for this? Like, I guarantee most people would love to just like hand it over to some accountant and forget it. Like, cool, I'm just going to do my thing. And then here you go, get what you can for it.
No, again, it's why in the music industry they have managers and agents, because if it was left to the bands, they would make terrible business decisions at every turn.
Absolutely.
And that they would get suckered into doing everything. They would take every charity gig, and they have to build those layers between so that they don't have to do those things.
100%. You said, well, when you met this Gurney gentleman, you preface it by saying, well, I can draw. And sort of nonchalantly or whatever. And speaking for someone that I can't draw, or at least I haven't learned to draw yet. What was the time when you were a child when you figured out, hey, I or somebody said you're a good drawer? When did that happen to you, or when if so, when?
Yeah, there's a few instances. One, when I was really young, I was sitting, I vividly remember this. I was sitting with my grandmother, and it was on some like Christmas vacation or something. We were sitting around at her kitchen table, and
it's the smell of turkey in the air.
No, actually, my great grandfather was making tongue, which I remember distinctly being absolutely mortified that like that was even a thing. But we were sitting around her kitchen table, and I was doodling or whatever, and she said, hey, and I think I was drinking something out of a can. I want to say it was a Pepsi. And she's like, why don't you draw that can for me? And I thought, yeah, no problem, And so I drew like a rectangle, and then like delicately made the Pepsi logo and spelled out the word and everything. And she's like, And I was very proud of my little can. And she's like, that's really good. Very nice job. Can I show you something? And she drew two little ellipses on the top and the bottom of the can. And then like, I think maybe threw like a shadow shape, to give it some grounding. And all of a sudden it was 3-dimensional. And I remember absolutely blowing my mind. So that was one instance.
That's awesome.
The other instance was I was in a hotel room with my dad and my stepmom after catching a Cincinnati Reds game. And we were just outside Cincinnati. And again, we were in some hotel, and I had picked up one of those, what is it? It was a correspondence course, the Arts League of New York or something. And it was a trifold pamphlet, and it was like, if you can draw these things, you might have a future in art, right? And so it was like a pirate, a turtle, and then a something.
We all remember this ad or
like,
whatever. We all do.
Step by step. Well, I got one, right? I sent away for it, and I got one. And then I diligently did the steps, right? And both my parents were like, "Oh my God, it looks just like the thing. What's amazing?
You might have an art career."
Thinking, whatever. I don't know.
Did you trace it? Did you trace it?
I'm a tracer. I would totally have traced it.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess it was always something that I enjoyed too. I mean, that's the other thing. Is like, it's ever been extremely challenging, and yet the most rewarding thing I've ever done. So it has the dual effect of being super rewarding and yet challenging enough to keep me interested,
That's very well put, Stephen. We're going to take a break for just a minute here and hear a word from our sponsor. It's called Paint Out West, Jess, that cool thing that Chris is doing.
Super cool.
Take a listen to this, and we'll be right back in just a minute with Stephen Haynes. 1 second.
On Friday, October 1st, 2021, when the sun rises upon the Colorado National Monument, have your paint set up and ready to go for the first session of Paint Out West, a virtual painting workshop conducted by Chris Kolupski. Stream this multi-class event from the comfort of your own studio as Chris demonstrates plein air painting from the Colorado National Monument, Arches National Park, Canyonlands, Zion, and Monument Valley. Chris will explain each step of his process and include magnified views of his color mixing and brush application. You can paint along with him in real time or replay classes later and pause to practice. Afterward, send a photo of your work and receive critique. This is a one-of-a-kind opportunity for you to paint the great American West without the cost of travel and lodging. Spots are limited, so don't miss out. Visit chriskolupski.com to register. That's CHRISKOLUPSKI.com to register.
Welcome back to the Plein Air Easton Podcast. I'm Tim, along with Jessica, and again, we are here with Stephen Haynes, plein air artist, veteran, and artist in general. Jess, we're going to catch up. We don't need to catch everybody up with speed if they've been listening. Hopefully they have been.
I hope you were paying attention because Tim is not going to recap anything.
Yes.
It's not going to happen.
We're not going to go back. Do you want to talk about this cool project that he's doing? Yeah, I want to start.
Well, I guess what I would say is one of the reasons why we asked Stephen on to speak with us is because he got into a conversation with Nick, who is our producer, and Stephen was blowing Nick's mind with a project that Stephen is working on. And so I guess what I would say is, Stephen, what did you say to Nick that started making him feel so excited about where your headspace is and what you're doing?
By the way, and we all took guesses as to where this is going and how this before we started to talk to you. So we'll see which one was closest by the end of this conversation.
Now nobody knows what we're talking about.
They're going to find out. Keep listening. This is really cool.
Stephen, what are you up to right now?
Okay, so
or one of the many things that you're up to right now.
Yeah, lots of things, but the one thing that I talked to Nick about was a project that I'm calling Portraits of People That Don't Exist, and it needs a little bit of a setup, so just bear with me for a sec.
Yep, that's what we want. We want the full setup.
Okay, full setup. A large part of this I am completely not qualified to talk about, but I will do my best. So, about a year and a half ago, I was listening to another podcast called Brave New Planet, I think, and they were talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning engineering and the coming wave of deep fakes and, sort of artificially generated imagery. And I was sort of, I'm not a technical person, but I was sort of interested in the sort of sci-fi aspect of it, right? And then they said something about this website called This Person Does Not Exist. And I thought, that's catchy. I'm going to check that out. So I went to this website, and if the listeners go to thispersondoesnotexist.com, they will see an artificially generated snapshot of a person that does not exist. And yet it is as close a representation of a person that you could fool just about anyone into thinking that it is a real person. And
I can stop him, and I can vouch for this. And everybody should take a moment and open up their phone and go to thispersondoesnotexist.com just so that they can get some visual context for themselves. And what Nick did is then he hit refresh and refresh and refresh, and there's an endless supply of these people, right? These these air quote people.
Right. So the thing about this is that every time you refresh the browser, it generates a new, unique snapshot, again, air quote snapshot, because none of this is real, right? Of a person that does not exist and will never exist again. That's the other thing, is that you could refresh 1,000 times and you won't get the same person a second time. Okay, so the way that this works, to my simple mind, is that it takes a large library of images, of portrait images from places like Flickr, and feeds them into a machine learning algorithm that dissects them and then builds a kind of active repository that can then generate these new unique images. I found this absolutely fascinating. And I started thinking, what is my relationship with computer graphics? I worked on a computer building stuff for 15 years, right? And I always had this philosophical thought of, if I build something on the computer and my hard drive crashes, does the thing actually exist? There's no tangible proof for it, right? And then there's larger philosophical questions about, do our lives exist if we don't make it known to other individuals, right? That gets way deep. But on an image making footing, this thought of, how does my relationship with this new program, this new machine learning algorithm, how does that take place? And as a person, as a plein air painter, right, I respond to outside imagery and then translate it in my own expressive way. So I thought, well, what if I painted these portraits that are being generated on this website, right? And so I started doing that. And then I started giving myself rules, okay, I'll paint, they're each small. They're less than 5 inch by 5 inch. And I thought, okay, let's see how quickly I can do this. And so the first thing was a time restriction. So I try to do these in 10 minutes or less. Like, it's really dashed off. I want them to appear to be dashed off, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second restriction was when I refresh, I can't then refresh again. So
you got to paint what comes next.
Whatever comes next.
You may not like how she looks.
Totally.
She's a redhead. Yeah. She's not talking to you, but like you got to paint her.
So it breaks down the subjectivity of the subject matter. Like, I can't have an opinion on this. It is what it is. I'm painting what I see. Okay, so I've done like a couple of hundred of these things at this point. And then I started thinking, well, what do I do with this? Like, I could have a show. That would be cool. Just
right.
Like if I did 1,000 of these, like, cool, it would be a weird wall of these little portraits, right? But then I started thinking, what if I turned it on its head and could somehow take my images and run them through the machine learning algorithm and make my own website that is taking the images I've built and then cut them apart and then make unique images, just like this person does not exist, but based on my paintings rather than the subset of images that it makes, right?
Gotcha.
I win.
Yeah, Tim wins. Tim wins for the record. Yeah. Tim totally wins.
That's cool.
That is very cool.
So I'm trying to figure out how to get that to happen. It's open source software, but I'm not smart enough to use it. So I'm trying to work with machine learning engineers to make this thing happen. And there are some new software out there that I'm dabbling with to try and actually get that part of it off the ground. And then I've
well, and I would think that the sheer data that you would need, I mean, like, you better keep painting, dude, because like I would think that, you know, you're not talking about needing 100 of these to be able to teach the computer, the logarithm. Like, if you're really going to do it in a meaningful way, you're going to have to be feeding in a whole hell of a lot of data.
I mean, is that true? I mean,
I would think so. Like,
for example, this person does not exist. They used a library. They trained it on a library of images that's like, I think 70,000 images. You know,
right?
So like, I'm not going to get to that point.
Get painting.
In this,
get
painting.
In
this decade, I guess, that's not going to happen. But
so it's maybe it could be a 10-year project or
sure,
something like that, or a 5-year project.
There are other sites that are based on this same algorithm that have clearly much less input on the front end, and interesting things happen after like the third or fourth refresh. Like, just things start to glitch out and tear apart, and like part of me, like, I like non-objective art enough to like where that
to think
that
that's a cool outcome too, and how that makes people think.
Right.
Well, I'm still like, my brain is so not evolved enough that I'm still back on your question about whether digital imagery that dies with a computer has actually ever existed, and the notion that when you're at the website and once you refresh, that image is never going to be created again. But if you have painted that image, now that image does actually exist.
Right.
So like the this person does not exist. You have erased that every time you are like painting one of those like air quotes people. Like, now those people actually do exist.
Yeah, precisely.
So like that's like, I'm having a hard time getting. So now what we're gonna do is disappear them again.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's a lot. It's a very cool like mental exercise to be thinking about, and you know, certainly there are plenty of great podcasts out there about the evolution of AI and what it's going to mean in the near future. Sure. I mean, like, we're not talking about way in the future anymore. We're talking about right now, and so to be thinking about how you're making that real and what the next steps are, I think is a very cool project. I can see how Nick was geeking out over this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Stephen, I would ask is how, when you were talking about, you know, fortunately at some point you have to make money, doing because I was really intrigued by like, wow, I would definitely go see that show. There's no question in my mind about it. There was like,
You don't let go of that show either, Stephen. You can do all of the things.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
But
the
like,
shows-
we like this wacky show idea
how
too.
would you
We
ma- how
want to
would
go
you
to the
make-
exhibition.
How would you make money by just because if you've been to the website, you can see there's nothing on it except for a face,
Right.
and then there's some technical talk on the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose building my own version of that site is like a step in a progression, right? It's like closing the loop just for myself, just to see what would happen. But I've very recently, like within the last couple of weeks, added a third layer to the whole thing, and that is so to recap. There is
Yeah.
There
Good,
is
good.
a
Two rules.
site
There's two
that's
rules.
called "This Person Does Not Exist." I'm painting portraits of the generated images from that site. Mm-hmm. I would like to make my own version of that site using the images that I paint. I then want to take whatever that spits out and do like monumental size images of those images.
And then we can all go to the Hirshhorn Gallery in Washington, D.C. and see this whole exhibition that
Right.
documents all of it, including a screen that's refreshing.
So-
and like,
so
it could be a multimedia,
Yeah,
major
yeah.
exhibition
Right.
at the end.
Ideally,
it totally could be.
Ideally, that's the thing. It's like you're guided through, in my wildest dreams version of this, the way that it plays out is that you're guided through the kind of like, you get a kind of elementary education in machine learning, and then you see this person does not exist.com or whatever, and then my interaction with that, and then the conclusion, which is like making art based on art that's based on nothing, like that's the other thing that just totally like blows my mind, is that at some point, like, this is all based on nothing, and I love that. Like that's the part of it that really excites me. Like it's degrees
almost
of removal from what, like, the snapshots of people that actually exist that were fed into the original machine. It's like that's been torn asunder, and now it's like, it's on the other. It's on the dark side of the moon.
And in some ways, like, if you actually got to that final iteration with those large portraits, like, is that actually a portrait of artificial intelligence?
Right. No, that's a good question.
Like, is
Yes.
that like what
yes.
artificial intelligence looks like? Like, if you're trying to create a visual image of artificial intelligence, is that artificial intelligence portrait at the end of the day?
Yeah.
And if you were doing it outside, would it be considered plein air artificial intelligence?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great project, man. It's really, really cool. I'm glad that you and Nick hooked up over the festival to talk about that. I don't how long will this take? I mean, where we can look for something on this?
An infinite amount of time.
Yeah,
it's going to take as long as it takes.
It's almost like a hobby on this. Like somebody would like.
Yeah, so I try to do like 3 or 4 a week. Like and these are all just on like
he's showing us one of these quick sketch portraits that he was talking about of somebody who doesn't exist. It's with paint. It looks like it's got lots of layers, but it is on the back of a facial tissue box from Target that he has cut into the. So he's not using a whole lot of expensive canvases.
There'll be two sides of the mural.
Right.
Sleepy Time Tea. That is a man who has long hair and a white shirt.
And then if you see in the background over my shoulder, these are all.
I see a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, it looks like you're at a artificial intelligence Sardi's.
Yeah.
Right, right, exactly. You just need their autographs on each one of those headshots, and you kind of have it going on.
Right. That's a great project, Steve. So yeah, I mean, good luck with that. And again,
Well, I guess
I
would say a couple of things. I would say, number one, if you are somebody who is in the AI space and wants to talk to Stephen about this, I have a suspicion that he would love to talk to you about it. If you are somebody who is a software engineer who is working on these projects, please get in touch with Stephen. It feels like this could go a bunch of different ways. So I think that is the sort of first thing that I would say. And the second thing I would say is we want to be kept abreast of this project because it sounds really cool.
No
matter how it evolves.
Yeah.
We want to go to the exhibition, Stephen, for sure.
Absolutely.
You've got us hooked.
Yeah.
You've got us as hooked as you got Nick when he's giving us the victory, arms up in the air response. This, again, just super cool.
Yeah, it really looks awesome. And so, and in the meantime, then you will keep up with the rest of what you're doing in your career in painting. What are you up to now besides the AI stuff?
I mean, I try to get out every day to paint, outside, just to keep it fresh, to keep the hand in it. I mean, that's definitely one of those things that if you go 3 days, you feel like you've forgotten everything. But I'm also trying to. I had a weird moment over the lockdown, as we all did, right?
Wait, you only had one weird moment over the lockdown?
One moment pertaining to my artwork.
Okay.
That I started calling into question like a lot of the decision making that I was doing, and it's funny because when Plein Air Easton came up, just a few weeks ago, I was at the tail end of working that out. So I went into it just like, all right, well, let's do this, and it was funny because being there and seeing everyone's work, it helped me finalize the whole trajectory that I had been on in a weird way. And so that doesn't really answer any questions, but it satisfies me.
So, I mean, I'm guessing, and you can elaborate. So you feel like you're kind of like back. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah. So it was without getting like too into the weeds, I was making stylistic choices, and because I had lost my comfort with what I was doing, say like the last time I was at Plein Air Easton in 2019, and I felt like I had run that as far as I could go, and then I sort of felt like that particular path had abandoned me, so I needed to like relearn some things in a certain way, again stylistically, and then really going through Plein Air Easton and seeing the work and remembering and having conversations, and sort of it was a means of justifying reintroducing myself to what I had been doing, and being okay with the fact that it was imperfect or whatever. And so when I got home from this most recent plein air, it was like I hit the ground running and did like five pieces that were like the best that I've done in a really long time. And it was so satisfying to be like, oh, right. This
is what I do.
Cool. Awesome.
No, I think that's, we like these podcasts never need to be an advertisement for Plein Air Easton. It's not where our headspace is. But I think like that, you bring up a really good point that we are starting to hear as a reoccurring theme. And you sort of answered the question, why engage in plein air festivals at all or competitions? And some of it is because when you are so much of what artists do is such a solitary endeavor, and I think you can really start battling your own demons or get into a rut in your own studio. And the notion of being able to surround yourself with other artists and be a part of that competitive environment and have to push yourself and challenge yourself in certain ways creates a whole new dynamic. I mean, again, we hear that sort of over and over again.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's refreshing to be painting alongside someone and to ask them about their practice, and it's almost like verbatim what you've been thinking in your head as your own like insecurities and idiosyncrasies, and then to have that reflected by someone else, and you're like, but you seem so well put together and you seem so confident in what you're doing, and they're like, oh,
it creates a great support structure.
I have no idea what I'm doing, and like it's awesome, and you're like, oh right, good. It's just, we're all on a continuum, and you just need to look at the long game,
Right. Well, and it kind of I was asking a question to myself before we got ready to do the interview, based on a Tears for Fears song, which I'm not going to go into, but the question is like, even though you're on the continuum and you're going to like, ride that out, for lack of a better term, do you ever find inside the continuum, Stephen, that like, well, I'm painting the same thing again. I'm painting a tree outside. I'm painting a tree outside. Or I'm painting a barn outside. Does that ever like come into?
What's the song or the lyric? You got to back that up.
I'll tell you.
You can't tell me later. The podcast listeners, they will want to know. Sing it for us, Tim.
No, it has to do with. It has to do with. What I think is probably one of the coolest songs ever written was Tears for Fears. Everybody Wants to Rule the World. I just think now I'm a punk rocker too, but in terms of melody and meaning, I think it's a great sort of. I think it's one of the best songs ever written. But then you listen to Shout, and I'm like, well, Shout you knew that Tears for Fears had the ability to make a song like Everybody Wants to Rule the World because Shout was so good. But once you hear Shout the 30th time, you're kind of tired of it. You know what I mean? And that kind of got me on to like painting the same thing over and over. Do you get tired of it?
Thank you for that context, Tim. It's way better now.
I just didn't want to talk that much, but anyway, but I appreciate you asking. Yes. Anyway, is that for people out there? Was that anything?
Yeah. Well, I think I have to preface this by saying that every artist is different, and what one person finds rewarding, another person would find absolutely mind-numbing. So with that stated, I will say that I have, while I'm typically pretty quiet and soft-spoken, I have the mind of a gnat. So I can't like do the same thing over and over again. As ironic as that is to do portraits of people that don't exist every day, I get that. But I try to look for things. I guess I'm trying to look for things that I'm trying to work beyond the subject matter, in that it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's interesting in terms of light, shape, value. Like I've seen pictures of fire hydrants that make me want to cry because it's evocative, So I'm trying to get to that place. And there's also something about like finding like beauty in the banality of everyday objects, or really banal scenes that, like, how could you possibly think that street with the dumpster on it has anything to offer? And yet when you see it at 6:30 in the morning on a sunny day, it speaks volumes, So it's less about doing pictures of trees over and over and over again, and it's more about finding interesting shapes and passages, be they shapes, buildings, cars, people, trees, whatever. Does that answer?
Right. Yeah, no, it's interesting because Sarah Linda Poli, when we were talking to her, said the exact. So she really focused on. She said she couldn't go into rooms, or not that she couldn't. She just didn't choose to do that, and paint interiors and how painters can bring those to life. She was really geared towards sunsets and the sky and that sort of thing. So that's it's a very interesting answer. And again, everybody's different. Like
but again, over and over again, a theme that we hear, and like Stephen has spoken to it in different ways. And I love the eloquence of talking about finding beauty in everyday things. But some of it too is, you could paint the same flower every single day. And I think about Rob Barber, who paints like the same scene for 3 years before he's done. But what you have to still be doing is pushing yourself and growing as an artist, or reflecting on what you're doing. And again, we keep running into the word intention, like doing it with some kind of intention. you know, or you do find yourself in the rut, or you do find yourself forgetting those skills or going off track, like, because it is that continuum. So you have to keep growing every day. You have to keep like finding the new way, or finding the beauty, or finding, because there hasn't been one artist who we've talked to who's like, oh yeah, I'm done learning.
Right.
My work here is done. Like, that's just not how these conversations have been flowing. And I guess like kind of our final concluding question that is connected to this, but like that we've been asking people is, when you find yourself in a space where you are feeling uninspired or overwhelmed or like really low, like what would be your advice for artists who are finding themselves in, whether it's that place of self-doubt, or whether it is again, just kind of looking around and saying, where do I frickin' start? Like, when you find yourself there, like, what do you do, or what advice would you give to somebody about what to do in that moment? Creative rut.
No. Get perfect question. Yeah. First of all, I find myself there 2 or 3 times a year at least. And the first thing that I do is...
I'm going to stop him. I like that, because what he did was create that same sense of empathy that he felt at Plein Air Easton. Like, did you hear that, everybody? You're not alone.
For sure.
He feels that way at least 2 or 3 times a year.
Absolutely. The first thing that I do is I turn off... I make all sorts of social media unreachable to myself. So I'll take it off my phone. I, delete it from my regularly viewed things on my browser or whatever.
So this is a real rut. This is not just a bad day.
Yeah, no, real rut.
No, he's like, I gotta check out.
So part of what feeds my insecurity is seeing how well everybody else seems to be doing it, and like I know that much of social media is curated,
is a false narrative,
and
right?
It could be a total disaster, and what you see through the lens is just a glimpse. I totally get that, but when you're in those dark places, it doesn't matter. All you see is what you're not doing, right? So I try and get away from all that. 2, I try and put away anything that I'm currently working on, because I'm prone to just picking it apart. And that goes hand in glove with turning off social media. Is if I disallow myself the ability to see how well everybody else is doing, it then doesn't reflect on my own work, So I put away anything I might be working on. 3, I go to old books. So I have a library of books that you guys can't see, but Charles Hawthorne's book on painting, or I'm totally spacing.
Are they all painting books?
All painting books.
All
but
painting?
The thing is, there's something unique about touching an analog object, right? And having to move at that object's speed. So flipping tactile pages and reading passages and reflecting on those passages, it's different. It's not the endless scroll of images and the fast food of social media. It's your vegetables. You know what I mean? It's basically putting your mind on a diet. And while it doesn't always work, it at least gives you some hope, because they're talking about, if you go back to books that were written 100 years ago, like Edgar Payne's treatise or is it Fred Carlson? Either their books on painting, they're talking about the same stuff. And while some of the materials are different and they have like a somewhat rigid structure in the way that they make pictures, you realize you're part of a deeper social structure than you may think you are, if that makes sense. Like there's a history to what you're doing, and if you can tap into that in this tactile analog way, I find it so much more sort of soul enriching than flipping through the channels or getting just bound up with the endless stream of images on social media. I love social media, don't get me wrong, but like there's a time and a place for it. So those are 3 things that I do. Turn off the social media, try not to look at the stuff that I'm currently working on, and then hit the books. And then I also carry these little field notes sketchbooks. Plug for field notes.
They look cute. It's a very small sketchbook, like very small, like an index card sized sketchbook. It looks like kind of like a passport.
And they come in like gridded or plain or whatever, but it's super informal, So
field notes, Nick. Maybe we can get them as a sponsor. Maybe.
And the guy behind him is Aaron Draplin, who's a mega designer. Anyway, but my family and I sit and we watch television together every night, and instead of just like zoning out, I'll pull this thing out and I'll just start sketching what's on television, right? It's just for me. As every artist knows, the sketchbook is just for you. You don't have to show anybody, but it'll work it gets your hand and your brain working in concert again. And like, you might touch upon something different, so those are some things that I do. The other thing is, quickly, using materials that you can't control. Like if you're a dedicated oil painter, doing something with watercolor or gouache or casein or something, some other.
See if your wife will let you mess up the kitchen for an afternoon.
Your wife will let you mess up the kitchen. Do something with collage. Like get out of your own lane. And something different. But specifically something that has less control than you're used to. And even if you stick with your own thing, like if you're usually a pretty tight sort of realistic painter, go for the house painting brushes and try and do something, because it's a completely different world. You have to let go, and you'll succumb to something else is what it's intended to get at.
Stephen, this has just been a really fun conversation.
As a true pro, Stephen, you're a true pro. It's been really great talking to you. Every time, the last 3 of these podcasts, I feel like my life is just so empty. I'm like, just keep going. But, a lot of these things, it's wonderful to talk to artists about it on the Plein Air Easton podcast, but a lot of these, we're getting to know individual people, and it's a lot of the things they say are universal. It's been really, really wonderful.
I know. I like it. It is so interesting. Like every person we talk to is so unique. Their path is so unique. Their passions are so unique. But your answer to how to get out of a rut is like almost exactly what Sarah Linda Poli said to us yesterday. She said it differently. She said that you need to she actually said you need to physically turn around all of the work that you are working on and you need to put it all away. I mean, she said the exact same thing. She said, it's not time for that work now. Like you can go back to it. You don't have to put it away. You don't have to destroy it, but you need to put it away. And she said, then you have to go to the books. And like that was the second. And then she said, you can take a painting that inspires you and try to paint like that artist that is inspiring you. But again, like her steps were not dissimilar. You have like articulated different aspects of it, but we are discovering some really interesting universal truths.
Touching the pages, turning the pages, that type of thing versus. Just again, scrolling down the thing. I'm sure that would totally change your whole mindset.
I know. Every night when I watch TV, I'm playing Panda Pop on my phone, which is like really not the same as a sketchbook, is what I'm going to say. I need to. I still am working some tactile things with my finger, but it's not the same.
And and again, I'd probably see the intensity of what you have to do to really be successful to some extent in this business, I imagine. And We're good. We've got, Jess, we didn't say, this is our, 28th podcast?
I don't know, 34th, I think is what we're up to. We never really know the numbers. Stephen, it was so great talking to you. You be well and take care of your family, and we can't wait to hear what's happening with your project. Please keep us abreast of all of those things.
Will do.
It was great talking to you today.
You've been listening to the Plein Air Easton Podcast. I'm Tim Wagon, signing off, along with Jessica Bellis.
See ya.
Don't forget, Paint Out West. Paint Out West.
Sign up. Do it.
And if you like what you heard, again, Stephen offered some great insights. Drop us a line at Nick's address. Just text Nick. We'll catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.
The Plein Air Easton Podcast is brought to you by the Avalon Foundation, enriching the lives of those on the Eastern Shore of Maryland through the arts. Visit avalonfoundation.org for details on events, performances, and educational programming offered throughout the year. The Plein Air Easton Podcast is produced by Nick Richards. Our theme music was generously provided by Blue Dot Sessions, with additional episode music by Podington Bear. Remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. You can learn more about Plein Air Easton at pleinaireaston.com.